I deleted the transfer notification before Armand could notice it on my screen. The movement was small, but my chest tightened in a way I didn't expect. It wasn't the first time I had quietly sent money to my family. The amount was never large, just small help that had slowly become a habit. But that night felt different from the others. For the first time, I realized I was hiding something instead of simply helping. In the living room, Armand helped Mira finish her puzzle on the floor. Their laughter stayed soft and warm while I stood still in the kitchen, carrying a guilt I couldn't fully explain. My name is Clara, and I always believed helping family was an act of love. I just never imagined that one day I would feel the need to hide it inside my own home. My mother texted again early that morning. I reread the message quietly while the rest of the house was still settling into the day. It was never about refusing to help them. I was simply getting tired of calculating everything inside my head before each new week began. While making Mira's breakfast, my thoughts kept dividing the remaining money for the week. Every small household need suddenly felt connected to one quiet decision I hadn't mentioned yet. Armand drank his coffee calmly and asked if we needed extra groceries this week. I answered too quickly, almost before I finished thinking about it myself. After saying everything was fine, the silence stayed with me longer than usual. The words sounded small, but they kept echoing in my mind for the rest of the morning. Later that afternoon, I transferred money to my younger brother again. Without thinking, my hand lowered the brightness on my phone screen before I even finished typing. That was when I finally noticed what had changed. The problem was no longer the money itself, but the quiet habit of hiding it from someone I loved. Growing up, helping each other was simply part of how our family lived. I never stopped to question it because it always felt normal and warm. My mother needed extra money. I sent what I could without thinking much about it. Helping my younger sibling felt just as automatic, like something expected of me. Lately, though, every message from my family makes my chest tighten a little first. I notice myself staring at notifications longer before opening them. Before replying, I started checking our bank balance in secret more often than I admitted to myself. My thoughts quietly split between helping them and protecting our own routine at home. Armand never clearly told me to stop helping my family. Still, I found myself hiding small things anyway, almost out of habit. One night, I opened my transfer history and scrolled longer than usual. Each amount looked small on its own, but together they felt unexpectedly heavy. For the first time, I wondered why something once done with love now carried guilt beside it. The question stayed with me long after I put the phone down. Sunday afternoon felt quiet and ordinary in our house. Mira watched cartoons while eating sliced fruit, and Armand focused on fixing the small kitchen lamp without rushing. I replied to my family's messages slowly, reading each one longer than usual. Somewhere in the middle of those conversations, I realized I had started avoiding money discussions at home. Armand had never made me feel afraid to speak honestly. What unsettled me was the thought that maybe I looked incapable of setting limits for myself. Lately, I had started questioning the reasons behind my help. It no longer felt entirely practical, and I could feel emotion making decisions before logic did. Sometimes I helped simply because saying no made me feel guilty for days. I began noticing that guilt had quietly become part of my routine. I felt trapped between two different kinds of guilt. One came from not helping my family enough, and the other came from hiding things inside my own home. The longer I stayed silent, the more I felt pulled between two lives I cared about deeply. And for the first time, I realized protecting everyone was slowly exhausting me too. Outside, nothing really looked different in our home. Dinner still felt warm, and the small jokes before bed still happened, like always. But every time a family message appeared on my phone, my shoulders tightened before I even opened it. I started noticing how often my body reacted before my mind did. I quietly stopped buying small things I used to enjoy without thinking twice. Not because we were struggling, but because part of my money no longer stayed with me. The hardest part was pretending nothing inside the house had changed. I kept answering normally while carrying thoughts that never fully rested. One night, Armand told me I looked tired lately. I smiled automatically and gave the answer that sounded easiest to explain. The truth was, I was exhausted from carrying too many conversations inside my own head. Every decision stayed there, circling quietly without ever being shared out loud. For the first time, I realized how lonely a decision could feel when I carried it by myself for too long. The house stayed quiet around me, but my thoughts no longer felt shared with anyone inside it. The next morning, Mira quietly asked for a new pencil case before school. The old one still worked, but the cracked lid kept slipping open in her backpack. I answered too quickly before I even thought about it. "Maybe later, okay?" Came out softer, but heavier than I intended. Mira simply nodded and looked back at her pencils. Then she said quietly, "Mama's helping a lot of people again, right?" Her words were simple, but they landed too precisely inside me. For a moment, the room felt unusually quiet. I kept looking at Mira a little longer than usual. It suddenly hurt to realize she could already feel where my attention had been going. It was never really about the pencil case itself. Little by little, our home had started adjusting around something we never openly discussed. That morning, I finally understood something I had avoided admitting to myself. I wasn't only giving more to my family outside the house, I was quietly taking space away from the one inside it too. The house was finally quiet after everyone went to sleep. I sat alone at the dining table, opening my transfer history before closing it again without finishing. I realized the exhaustion had been building for a long time. It was not only about money, but about carrying every decision quietly by myself. I had spent years trying to become the dependable daughter in every situation. Saying yes became so automatic that I rarely noticed how tired I felt afterward. Little by little, the tension followed me back into my own home. What hurt most was knowing I had started hiding parts of my life from the people closest to me. I used to believe love meant continuing to give no matter what, but somewhere along the way, I forgot that peace inside a home also needs protecting. I had been so afraid of disappointing the family outside my house. Without realizing it, I stopped noticing the quiet needs inside my own home. For the first time, I stopped seeing boundaries as something selfish. Maybe protecting balance at home is also a quiet form of responsibility. After Mira fell asleep, we stayed in the living room with the television humming softly in the background. I kept staring at my hands for a moment before finally deciding to speak. The sentence felt heavier once it was spoken out loud. Armand looked at me quietly, as if he was trying to understand what I had been carrying alone. I explained the small transfers one by one, and why I kept hiding them. Somewhere in the middle of the conversation, I realized how tired I had become from carrying guilt quietly. I had prepared myself for anger before I even started talking, but the expression on Armand's face looked more hurt than disappointed. When he said he did not mind helping my family, my chest tightened unexpectedly. I realized I had been afraid of facing a conversation that was actually asking for honesty. For the first time in a long while, home did not feel divided into separate loyalties. It felt possible to care for everyone without disappearing inside the process. That night, we started talking about limits, with calmer hearts. Not to stop caring, but to make sure care would no longer quietly exhaust our home. The next morning, the house felt slightly quieter inside me. Nothing was fully solved yet, but I no longer carried it alone in silence. I started pausing before answering every request for help. Saying "let me think about it" felt unfamiliar, almost heavier than saying yes. The guilt still appeared sometimes, especially when I chose not to send money immediately. But I began noticing the difference between helping sincerely and helping out of fear. Decisions became slower, but they also felt clearer. For the first time in a while, I was listening to myself before reacting to everyone else. The following week, I finally bought a new pencil case for Mira. Watching her smile over something so small made the house feel warmer again. I began understanding that protecting our own home was also an act of love. Caring for my husband and child did not make my love for my family any smaller. Maybe healthy love is not about giving endlessly without pause. Maybe it is about learning how to protect what matters, including yourself and the home you return to every day. I used to think loving my family meant never refusing their needs. Lately, I've started realizing that constantly saying yes can quietly exhaust a person too. The guilt still appears sometimes when I pause before helping someone. But I'm beginning to understand that discomfort can be part of learning new boundaries. I'm still figuring out how to care for people without neglecting the peace inside my own home. Some days the balance feels clearer, and some days it still feels fragile. I used to think everyone else needed me more urgently than I needed rest. Now I notice how much emotional weight many women quietly carry inside ordinary routines. Maybe setting boundaries doesn't mean loving people less. Maybe it's simply learning how to stay emotionally present without losing yourself in the process.